According to the National Electrical Code, disconnecting means for all appliances in bathrooms must be located outside the bathroom or in an adjacent area accessible from the bathroom. The disconnecting means must be clearly labeled to indicate the appliance it controls. Let's consider options for disconnecting means. Firstly, a subpanel. Installing a subpanel outside the bathroom and running feeders to the water heater would provide a convenient and safe way to disconnect the unit. The subpanel can be labeled and locked to prevent unauthorized access. However, subpanels are typically larger and more costly than other options. Secondly, flush-mounted disconnects. These disconnects can be mounted flush to the wall outside the bathroom, providing a more discreet option. They are available in various sizes and configurations to accommodate different amperage requirements. However, they may protrude slightly from the wall and could be considered unsightly in the bathroom area. Thirdly, wall-mounted enclosures. Enclosure boxes can be mounted on the wall outside the bathroom to house individual disconnects for the water heater. This option allows for a more compact and less visible solution than flush-mounted disconnects. However, it still requires drilling holes in the wall and running conduit to the enclosure. The final decision on what type of disconnecting means to use will ultimately depend on the inspector's interpretation of the code. It is recommended to present all the options to the inspector and explain the advantages and disadvantages of each. Consider the customer's aesthetic preferences and discuss the potential impact of different disconnecting means on the appearance of the bathroom. If possible, provide a solution that meets the code requirements while also addressing the customer's concerns. NEC Section 406.9 states that disconnecting means for all appliances in bathrooms must be located outside the bathroom or in an adjacent area accessible from the bathroom. NEC Section 406.8 specifies that the disconnecting means must be clearly labeled to indicate the appliance it controls. When selecting a subpanel, ensure it has adequate capacity for the water heater's load, considering the 340 amp 240 volts feeds and any future expansion. Choose a subpanel with a main breaker that can serve as the disconnecting means. When using flush-mounted disconnects, select devices rated for the appropriate voltage and amperage, in this case 240 volts and 40 amps per disconnect. Ensure that disconnects are accessible and clearly labeled. Wall-mounted enclosures should be sized appropriately to house the individual disconnects and provide adequate space for wiring. The enclosure should be rated for the environment, especially if exposed to moisture. When installing any disconnecting means, follow all applicable electrical codes and regulations, including proper grounding and bonding. Use appropriate wiring methods such as conduit or cable, and ensure all connections are secure. Consider the physical layout of the bathroom and adjacent areas when determining the location of the disconnecting means. Choose a location that is easily accessible and does not obstruct pathways or create hazards. Discuss the appearance of the disconnecting means with the customer, considering factors such as size, color, and style. Select a solution that blends in with the surrounding decor and minimizes visual impact. When presenting options to the inspector, provide detailed information about each disconnecting means, including specifications, installation methods, and code compliance. Be prepared to answer questions and address any concerns the inspector may have. Always prioritize safety when installing electrical equipment, following all applicable codes and regulations. If unsure about any aspect of the installation, consult with a qualified electrician. A subpanel offers the advantage of centralized control and overcurrent protection for the water heater. It can also accommodate additional circuits in the future. Flush-mounted disconnects provide a more discreet appearance compared to subpanels, as they are integrated into the wall. However, they may not offer the same level of convenience and flexibility as a subpanel. Wall-mounted enclosures offer a compromise between subpanels and flush-mounted disconnects, providing a compact and less visible solution. However, they may require more installation effort and coordination. When selecting a disconnecting means, consider the long-term needs of the customer and the potential for future changes or additions to the electrical system. Choose a solution that can accommodate these needs and provide reliable performance. Ensure that the disconnecting means is properly labeled and identified. so that it can be easily located and operated in case of an emergency. Use permanent labeling methods that are resistant to fading or damage. When installing electrical equipment in a bathroom, be mindful of the potential for moisture and humidity. Use appropriate materials and methods to protect against corrosion and electrical hazards. Consider the accessibility requirements of the disconnecting means, ensuring that it can be easily reached by all users, including those with disabilities. Follow the guidelines of the Americans with Disabilities Act (ADA) when applicable. When choosing a disconnecting means, factor in the cost of materials, labor, and installation. Compare the total cost of each option and select the most cost-effective solution that meets the code requirements and customers' needs. Always obtain the necessary permits and approvals before starting any electrical work. Comply with all applicable local, state, and national codes and regulations. Prior to starting any electrical work, always de-energize the circuit at the main panel. Verify the absence of voltage using a reliable testing device. Wear appropriate personal protective equipment (PPE) such as safety glasses, gloves, and insulated tools. Avoid working on electrical equipment in wet or damp conditions. If the water heater requires 340 amp 240 volts feeds, ensure that the subpanel or disconnecting means is sized accordingly. Use appropriately sized conductors and overcurrent protection devices. When running feeders to the water heater, follow the NEC guidelines for conductor sizing, directing, and overcurrent protection. Use the appropriate type of conduit or cable for the installation. When making connections to the water heater, follow the manufacturer's instructions and use the appropriate connectors and terminals. Ensure that all connections are tight and secure. After completing the installation, thoroughly test the disconnecting means to ensure that it is functioning properly. Verify that it effectively disconnects power to the water heater. When selecting a subpanel, consider the available space in the adjacent area. Choose a subpanel size that fits comfortably and does not obstruct pathways or create hazards. If using flush-mounted disconnects, ensure that they are properly recessed into the wall and do not protrude excessively. Use a level to ensure that they are installed straight and plumb. When mounting enclosure boxes on the wall, use appropriate fasteners and mounting hardware to ensure that they are securely attached. Use a stud finder to locate wall studs and attach the enclosure to the studs whenever possible. When running conduit or cable to the disconnecting means, follow the NEC guidelines for routing, support, and protection. Avoid running conduit or cable through areas where it could be damaged or exposed to moisture. When making connections inside the disconnecting means, ensure that the conductors are properly stripped, terminated, and labeled. Use a torque wrench to tighten the connections to the manufacturer's specified torque. After completing the installation, inspect the disconnecting means for any signs of damage or defects. Replace any damaged or defective components before energizing the circuit. Provide the customer with clear instructions on how to operate the disconnecting means and the importance of keeping it accessible and unobstructed. Remind the customer to contact a qualified electrician if they have any questions or concerns about the electrical system. When selecting a disconnecting means, consider the potential for future maintenance or repairs. Choose a solution that is easy to access and service. Ensure that there is adequate space around the disconnecting means for maintenance and repairs. If the water heater is located in a confined space, such as a closet or alcove, ensure that there is adequate ventilation to prevent overheating. Follow the manufacturer's recommendations for ventilation requirements. When installing electrical equipment in a bathroom, be aware of the potential for ground fault conditions. Use ground fault circuit interrupters (GFCIs) to protect circuits that serve receptacles or other equipment in the bathroom. Ensure that the GFCIs are properly installed and tested. When selecting a disconnecting means, consider the potential for voltage drop. Use appropriately sized conductors to minimize voltage drop and ensure that the water heater receives adequate voltage. Use a voltage tester to measure the voltage at the water heater and verify that it is within the acceptable range. If the water heater is located a significant distance from the main panel, consider using a larger conductor size or increasing the voltage to reduce voltage drop. Consult with a qualified electrician to determine the appropriate conductor size and voltage. When installing electrical equipment, be aware of the potential for electromagnetic interference (EMI). Use shielded cables and grounding techniques to minimize EMI. Keep electrical wiring away from sensitive electronic equipment. When selecting a disconnecting means, consider the potential for harmonic distortion. Use filters or other mitigation techniques to reduce harmonic distortion. Harmonics can cause overheating and damage to electrical equipment. When installing electrical equipment, be aware of the potential for surge voltages. Use surge suppressors to protect against surge voltages. Surges can damage sensitive electronic equipment. When selecting a disconnecting means, consider the potential for power outages. Install a backup power system to provide power during outages. A backup power system can prevent damage to equipment and ensure continuity of service. When installing electrical equipment, be aware of the potential for electrical fires. Use fire-resistant materials and construction techniques to minimize the risk of fire. Install smoke detectors and fire extinguishers in the area. When selecting a disconnecting means, consider the potential for vandalism or tampering. Use tamper-resistant hardware and enclosures to prevent vandalism or tampering. Secure the disconnecting means to prevent unauthorized access. When installing electrical equipment, be aware of the potential for corrosion. Use corrosion-resistant materials and coatings to protect against corrosion. Inspect the equipment regularly for signs of corrosion. When selecting a disconnecting means, consider the potential for extreme temperatures. Use equipment that is rated for the expected temperature range. Protect the equipment from extreme temperatures. When installing electrical equipment, be aware of the potential for moisture. Use moisture-resistant materials and construction techniques to protect against moisture. Seal all openings and penetrations to prevent moisture intrusion. When selecting a disconnecting means, consider the potential for dust and dirt. Use dust-tight enclosures and seals to protect against dust and dirt. Clean the equipment regularly to remove dust and dirt. When installing electrical equipment, be aware of the potential for vibration. Use vibration-resistant materials and mounting techniques to minimize vibration. Isolate the equipment from sources of vibration. When selecting a disconnecting means, consider the potential for impact. Use impact-resistant materials and construction techniques to protect against impact. Shield the equipment from potential impacts. When installing electrical equipment, be aware of the potential for chemical exposure. Use chemical-resistant materials and coatings to protect against chemical exposure. Provide adequate ventilation to remove chemical fumes. When selecting a disconnecting means, consider the potential for ultraviolet UV radiation. Use UV-resistant materials and coatings to protect against UV radiation. Shield the equipment from direct sunlight. When installing electrical equipment, be aware of the potential for rodent damage. Use rodent-resistant materials and construction techniques to prevent rodent damage. Seal all openings and penetrations to prevent rodent entry. When selecting a disconnecting means, consider the potential for insect infestation. Use insect-resistant materials and construction techniques to prevent insect infestation. Seal all openings and penetrations to prevent insect entry. When installing electrical equipment, be aware of the potential for mold growth. Use mold-resistant materials and construction techniques to prevent mold growth. Provide adequate ventilation to prevent moisture buildup. Remember to consult with local electrical codes and qualified professionals for specific requirements and guidance on the installation of electrical equipment.